Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm Aya Soma, and I'm here with Bhakti Sanatavihani here to my left. And tonight we're here for monk chat. So your opportunity to ask questions about Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha or anything related to Buddhism. And we'll try our best to answer your questions. And hello to some friends. Hello to Gita, Wasabi, Suzanne, Spook Waters, Rick, Kumu, and Kit who are checking in. And hello to everyone else who is coming in. So I see a question from Rick, and hello to Karuna. Nice to see you as well. And Mary. Hope everything is all right, Mary. I've been sending blessings to you and your husband. Hope all is good. So Rick says, can you offer guidance on how to focus our efforts when practicing the highest blessings outlined in the Mahamangala Sutta? Thank you. Matte?
Yeah. So that sutta is just basically telling us like how we should live our lives, from being a layperson, actually from being young, from when you're a child all the way to when you grow up and live the family life, and then in those days leave the family life after you finish doing your duties to society. So it's just really practicing the Noble Eightfold Path and practicing generosity and practicing sila. It's just another way about talking about the Noble Eightfold Path, which is more focused on like how do you go from like raising your children and living the lay life and then leaving the lay life behind and focusing more on practicing the Dhamma. So it's just very simple things. Like in the very beginning, the most important foundation when you grow up is who you surround yourself with, your environment, right? And that's usually in the hands of your parents. Your parents try to guide you and tell you who you should hang out and who you shouldn't hang out with. And then from there, it's like getting a proper education and also taking care of your family. And then after you kind of do your duties in society, then you can like leave it all behind. And then it gets into the higher trainings and knowledges. So it's just basically the Eightfold Path, just kind of more directed towards like that traditional style that people used to live in India at that time, where you would live the home life and then you would have kids and you would raise them and then you'd give everything to your children and you would leave, and practice the holy life. So it's nothing separate. I mean, it's already what you're doing right now. It's just a nice guide. I really like it. I think about it like a shorter version of like the Sigalavada Sutta, but with the higher training also, So like, okay, you do everything in the Sigalavada Sutta, but then there's a higher training also there for when you renounce the lay life. So if you want more examples, like particular details on how to live the life, you can go to the Sigalavada Sutta and the Digha Nikaya. And there you'll like the Buddha will go into all the details of how to do that first half of that sutta. Aya?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Bhante. Yes, it's actually one of my favorite suttas, but I'm not credible actually anymore because I say that almost every sutta is my favorite sutta. But yeah, I find it actually really beautiful how it starts also with really kind of actually recently I shared some words of Dhamma precisely on the first verses of the Mangala Sutta, and which go essentially the Buddha invites us to really reflect on who are we serving, who are we looking up to, who are we making offerings to, and so are we serving fools, or are we looking up to fools, or are we actually looking up to people like the Buddha? We're looking up to like all the arhats, bhikkhus and bhikkhunis of the past. Are we looking up towards who are our role models essentially? Because that will inspire us a lot. So also kind of who are we following, to say it in kind of more modern terms, who are we following on Instagram? Who are we following? Who are we friends with on Facebook? What pages are we following? Sometimes we actually put a lot of not that much importance on these things. We kind of think it's kind of a little bit frivolous. But really there's a huge difference actually, especially since we're spending so much time connected online. like what kind of information are we introducing in our minds? So there's a huge difference, in actually following, for example, all sorts of celebrities that are doing all sorts of foolish, actually, actions all the time, breaking constantly all the precepts, for example. And we think that maybe it's not too much. It's like a sort of trivial thing that we're doing. It doesn't have that much weight. But actually, to a certain degree, we're serving the fools in that way, in the sense that we're actually introducing that role model in our minds, as opposed to if we're actually following even accounts that, on the other hand, are sharing words of Dhamma, or sharing pictures of practitioners that are cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path. That is something that we're introducing in our minds in every moment. So being very selective on who we're serving, who we're offering. So in Italian, we have this saying that goes something around like that. We can translate it with serve, go with people who are better than you, and make them offerings, buy them things, which essentially has that sense of really associating with people who we want to become, right? So, for example, when Ajahn Pasanno was here a few years ago, he was really he's a really incredible practitioner. So all of us, we were making a lot of effort and trying to really take advantage of this opportunity of serving him. So making sure that he was comfortable, and by making sure that he was comfortable, we were also associating with him. So we would have a lot of opportunities to learn the Dhamma from him, to absorb how he was going about his day, how he was speaking, how he was acting. And that in itself is a Dhamma talk, and that is a way that inspires us. So we can do that in every single possible way, through body, speech, and mind. And then we can go throughout, as Bhante was saying, the Mangala Sutta, and there are very practical instructions on things that we can develop and empower us to practice the path. All right, so Kit says, any advice for someone who wants to stop smoking marijuana? I'm observing my mind and body now when I smoke, and I do see the harm. I'm getting a little more self-control, but craving keeps winning. Okay.
Yeah, so keeping it with the same theme of the Mahamangala Sutta, who are you looking up to? Who are your role models in life, and who are your friends, and what kind of environment? What's the entertainment? What kind of music and TV do you watch? If they're all promoting the use of drugs, it's going to be very difficult, like if people in your family, your best friends, the people that you worship, and the TV shows that you watch, if everything's pointing you in one direction, it's going to be difficult to resist that. So the first part is like the Buddha says in the meditation instructions, finding a suitable place, right? And with spiritual companions. So that's very important, Sometimes we're very limited by our conditions, and we need to try to find a way to change those conditions. You might be a very good practitioner, but there's too much pressure from the outside. So, my first kind of suggestion would be, to the extent that you can, try to change the conditions around you, maybe watch different shows, listen to different music, hang out with different people, find a support group, that's going to help you practice abstinence, or at least harm reduction, so you do it less. Also, try to you really have to change your life. You really have to change your life. I'll disclose a little something about myself. I had problems with alcoholism also before I became a monk. And I really just had to basically cut everything out of my life and stop doing everything that I was doing before. Like, I had to change my entire life. And that meant losing a lot of friends, like 90-something% of them. Like, I had to let go of them, right? I don't hate them, or I didn't kick them out of my life, but I stopped doing the things they were doing. So we just kind of like organically, naturally distance ourselves, because we weren't doing the same things, and they stopped inviting me to all these things, and we just kind of drifted apart. And I stopped going to social events where there would be a lot of drinking, and it was very difficult coming from a Mexican family, like just drinking everywhere. Baptism, birthday parties, a baby's born, someone dies, like any excuse to drink. So we really have to be mindful of our environment, right? Practice internally and externally. Be mindful of both. So you need a good support system. And the best way to do it is not to have the temptation around you all the time, you know? And then also let people know. That helps you stay accountable that you want to quit. Let people know so they can support you in whichever way they can too, right? So like we can take these very practical steps, which the Buddha gives us in all these suttas, like especially in the Sigalabhata Sutta, finding good friends. A good friend will take care of you and they won't let you do those kind of things too, you know? So when it comes to my own experience dealing with addictive substances, it's really, we have to change our entire life. That's really, and it's difficult because we love our friends and we're comfortable where we're at and it's safe, and changing our life is scary and it's painful and it's difficult, but we have to think about our long-term benefits, like the Buddha always says, thinking about our long-term benefits in this life and in future lives. So that's what I would kind of suggest as my perspective on this issue.
Awesome. Thank you, Bante. And Margaret says, can you please give suggestions on how to guard one's hearing and smelling pertaining to the 5 sense doors? I try to ignore it. Well, stop ignoring it. So actually ignoring it is ignorance. That's what ignorance precisely means, ignoring something. Right? And what is the cause of suffering? Well, the cause of suffering is tanha, so craving. But what is the cause of craving? It's ignorance. So by ignoring something, we're actually fueling our attachment to it. So first and foremost, we actually need to understand what to guard. How can we guard what we don't understand? So it's very important. It's easier actually during meditation practice to familiarize ourselves with our mind, familiarize ourselves with how actually the 5 sense doors work. How are we having this kind of experience, right? In reality, it's a little bit harder to jump straight into guarding our mind or guarding our senses while we are out and about in the world, right? Because there's so many different things going on, and then our habits will usually be very strong and kind of somewhat probably will become aware of an action after we're already done it, like rather than a preventative measure. So what is important to do is to actually really take the time and effort to train the mind in meditation practice, to train the mind to be mindful, essentially, to train the mind to look at what is going on in what is going on in the mind, to train the mind to see the mind fundamentally. And there's going to be perhaps less things going on, less usually hearing and smelling, but even the few sounds that one will hear in meditation practice will actually appear a lot louder than during the day, right? Obviously, if we're meditating in a sort of kind of quiet place, that may be in our room, but every kind of sound then will start being a little bit more intense. So we can start paying attention to it. We can start seeing how we react to it. We can start seeing how the mind latches to it. How there can be a sort of craving for the sound or a dislike for the sound, right? So how we can perhaps have a strong understanding of the gratification that there can be in the sound, right? And perhaps we can see the drawback. The sound is changing or disappearing. And can be also the sound of silence, right? The changing and disappearing, right? So then a really annoying sound appearing, right? We can see how maybe we're a little bit triggered by all of the situation, or maybe we're very much pleased by the experience. So observing all of that and seeing this kind of tension. And then we can see how instead of chasing, going back to either wanting or not wanting or getting rid of our experience, whatever it is, we can actually perhaps try another way out of this unsettling state, which is not wanting it to be different than what it is, right? So letting go of the desire for either the experience to continue or either the experience to stop, right? To be different than either it is. And you can go like, oh, actually, there is this sort of new way of going about the world. And it's the same for smells as well. Especially if you're maybe on retreat and you're following the 8 precepts, and maybe the cooks in the retreat center are preparing the food for the next day. That's actually a really good practice. Have all sorts of smells, and you can't have any kind of food. Well, there's a lot of strong sensations in the mind. So all great opportunities to look at what's going on, and to look at our tendencies, and to train ourselves to have a different kind of reaction. And this will create the conditions for then us to become a little bit more acquainted with the experiential feeling of these sort of strong impulses. And then when we're going about our days in our sort of regular lives, then it will become a little bit our life will become a little bit slower, in the sense that we'll perceive immediately. We'll start going, oh, okay, this is this smell, and from this smell, there's this other tendency of mine coming into being, and now there's this option. How do I act? Do I act in this way or this other way, or do I just let it go? Right? And maybe sometimes we're actually going to act in accordance with our habits, but we're going to do the same thing that we were doing before, but with mindfulness. So it won't be automatic anymore. We'll see, oh, okay, I'm doing that just like I used to before, but I see that actually I'm making a choice. And then after a while, we're going to go like, okay, I actually don't really like the result of this choice, of this strong habit that I have. How about I do it in a different way? Right? And then we try the different way, and we're like, oh, actually, this result is much better. Right? So then it becomes a bit of more of an experiential practice. And so it will become easier to guard than our sense doors. It won't be this struggle of going like, okay, now I don't want this, I don't like this, it has to stop, I'm just going to ignore it. No, we actually understand, we become aware of our reality. We become aware of our mind. We become aware of all the different objects that are in our experience. And we start making choices that have results that lead to happiness instead of suffering. And so it's we are becoming more and more aware, more and more knowledgeable, and less ignorant in every possible way. So this is what comes to mind. I don't know if Dante have any other reflections. And Jojo says, what's a good way to have right intention? I always get lost in other things throughout the day. Do I just keep getting better the more I try? Should I just wait?
Okay. So we have to, right intention. What does right intention mean? First is nekama, right? Like renunciation, letting go. Then we have avyapada, so like non-anger, non-hatred, which we can think in the positive, which is like metta, loving kindness, and non-cruelty, avihimsa, or the positive side of it is compassion or kindness, being kind to others. So this right intention, I usually think about it like harmless and blamelessness. So everything that we do, we should think about these kind of, is it harmless? Is it blameless? And that's kind of usually the way I go about doing things. And I feel like it's a very effort, at least in my understanding, is really thinking about the benefit of all beings, benefit of oneself, benefit of others, and benefit of all beings. So when we wake up, from the moment that we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, our effort is for the benefit of oneself, others, and all beings. That's the intention. And that's, to me, such a beautiful thought. Like, it's just about thinking about other people's happiness and your own happiness, and just focusing on your happiness and the happiness of others and other well-being, and wanting everyone to be happy. Is basically just having all these beautiful, wholesome thoughts all day, right? So that's, we like to do things that are pleasurable. We like things that make us happy. That's what everyone does naturally. So once we're able to kind of focus the mind and resting on this kind of good intention, this blameless happiness, this harmless happiness, instead of the one that we usually do, which comes with all kinds of problems of the seeking all these sensual pleasures. We had all these conflicts in our relationships and in society, and ecological conflicts where now we're destroying the world for the pursuit of sense pleasures, and kind of very gross in course, happiness, we focus instead on the right effort, the right way to get happiness, which is renunciation, letting go, practicing giving away dana. Dana is a way of practicing nekama, of letting go. You're giving your time, you're giving your energy, you're giving your wealth for the benefit of others and yourself too, because you're getting good karma from doing it too, right? So you benefit too. And it feels good to see someone else happy, right? So all of this to say is that when we think about right intention, we're really thinking about harmlessness, blamelessness, the benefit of all beings, and all of these things are happy thoughts. You can rejoice in having this, right? Rejoice means to be happy, that you have a blameless mind. And it's just, you can do simple things. Like I ride the bus a lot in LA, and I get on the bus and I always tell the bus driver, good day, good morning, good afternoon. And when I get off, I say thank you. Half of the time I get a response, the other half of the time I don't get one. It doesn't matter. It makes me feel good to acknowledge the bus driver. I think about he's working all day or she's working all day. People insult them, people assault them. There's all kinds of weird things that happen on there. But at least that person can go home and be like, someone appreciates what I did for them today. Like that makes me happy to do that for them. Same thing if I don't know, I meet someone and they provide some service. I go, oh, thank you for doing this for me, and opening doors or doing small things, smiling at people. Hello, like Venerable here. We went walking the other day. She's waving to everyone that walks by. Hello, hello, hello. And half of the people don't wave back. They just keep driving. Some people, they don't answer, but I am still happy even if they don't wave back. So that's the intention, right? The intention to bring joy, to bring happiness to others, oneself, and all beings. So once we focus on the happiness of all beings, you just want to do it. It's a very self-rewarding kind of cycle that just perpetuates itself because you want to keep doing it. Right intention shouldn't feel like painful or forceful, and then it's kind of like we've kind of lost the point of the intention. The intention is very wholesome all the time. So just focus on that, on the blamelessness and harmlessness and happiness. That's the real important intention that we should be doing.
Sadhu. Thank you, Bante. And Daniel, good to see you online. Hope you're well. And Daniel says, does the word dukkha mean different things in different contexts, especially thinking of the 3 characteristics versus the 4 noble truths? I don't think so. I mean, dukkha simply means difficult to bear. So in the 3 characteristics, the Buddha essentially gives us a very simple, profound teaching of essentially noticing these 3 characteristics in all of our experience once again. So the characteristic of anicca, so of impermanence, the characteristic of dukkha. So in this sense, maybe we can translate it better as it's difficult to bear because it's unsatisfying, right? Which is very much connected to the first characteristic of impermanence. And then the characteristic of anatta, so the impersonality of all things. So not to take this take this personally, but actually understand that everything is impersonal. So when we start looking at our experience in this way, then also there's a cessation of dukkha. So it becomes not difficult to bear. And in the 4 noble truths, obviously, dukkha is difficult to bear, but the Buddha also gives us very straightforward examples of dukkha. So obviously death is dukkha, right? Old age is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, being separated from what we like is dukkha, coming into contact with things that we dislike is dukkha. So all of these things obviously we see are difficult to bear. So sometimes maybe we translate dukkha as suffering, and that is a very dukkha actually translation, because it is one connotation of dukkha, but it's not the full and only meaning of dukkha. So dukkha has this really big range of things that it encompasses. So from once the thing that we just kind of don't like, or it's just not really that great, the dissatisfaction, to all of the strong suffering that we can have, and also actually the pleasantness that there is. So the pleasant experience that we have. Also the sukha is dukkha, and that's very difficult for us to even like understand intellectually, let alone experientially. So that's a process, right, that the Buddha invites us to trust him and explore our experience with different lenses, and then we start seeing, actually even the sukha is dukkha, in fact, and we kind of get a little bit dispassionate about what we think instead is very easy to bear, and actually we want more and more and more. And when we have that dispassion, then we're ready to let go and let go more and more and more until we let go of everything completely. I don't know if, Bhante, you have a different, perhaps, or something else to.
I don't think I have anything different to say, but I think, something important, something that helped me understand what dukkha means. And if we look at the context of, like, from what I understand, during the time of the Buddha, the Brahmins were saying that the Atman, the self, is permanent and blissful. And the Buddha turns that around. He goes, no, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and no self. There is no Atman, right? So we get this anicca, dukkha, anatta is the reverse, like flipping around what the Brahmins were saying of a self, an Atman, permanent, like satisfactoriness or happiness, sukha, and permanent, right? So we kind of get the opposite. We get the opposite side. The Buddha's telling us, no, the reality of it is that everything's fleeting, right? And that's why it's unsatisfactory. Or you can't bear it because there's nothing to hang on to. There's nothing that's going to give you forever pleasure. Another important thing is also that there's like dukkha, and like sometimes we say like dukkha, I like to say, and dukkha domanassa, and like sukha, and sukha somanassa. So like I can say dukkha is like you hurt yourself physically, right? Or there's like an unpleasant sensation and feeling. And then like the dukkha domanassa is like the anger that you feel about it, or the sadness that you feel about it, right? So sometimes dukkha can be split into like these two different ways, right? Like the very obvious kind of dukkha of like physical pain and being uncomfortable and things like that, and the domanassa, all the mental affliction and sadness and depression and all this kind of other stuff. And the same thing with sukha. Sukha can be a very physical thing, sensation, but then sukha can also be like piti, pasadi, and sukha, like we get in the actual jhanas, in the higher states. And then sometimes when we see like also like in Vedana, we see dukkha there, kind of means like unpleasant, right? It's not like that kind of like existential dukkha where like the world's falling apart. So maybe there might be a little bit of distinction where the dukkha there is the dukkha, the kind of very obvious one where you hurt yourself. But then kind of like the purposeful one, like, what is my purpose in this world? There's no purpose. Like, why did my mom die? All of these kind of things. And like, why am I poor, or why am I sick? That is like the domanassa, like the mental affliction dukkha part, right? So there is these kind of subtleties, but actually, like I was saying, dukkha is an all-encompassing thing. It encompasses everything from like just being agitated to being like unsatisfactory to like real suffering or like terrible pain, like being burned alive. It encompasses everything. So like it does depend on context, but it's the same meaning, but it just kind of has like a different degree, right? It's a different degree of dukkha depending where we find it in its context.
Perfect. Thank you, Bhante. And Flower says, I have recently started suffering panic attacks, and the only person who understood me is following the path. What do you think they would say? I do not want this pain anymore. Bhante, would you like to address this?
Let me read it one more time. Venerables, I recently started suffering panic attacks, and the only person who understands me is following the path. What do you think they would? So it's not it's a hypothetical question, right? Like if there was a person who understood the path, what would they say to me? It's a hypothetical question. Because that's what I didn't get. I was like, well, if you know a person like that, just associate with them more. That's a good friend. That's a kalyanamitta. Yeah. If you know someone like that, please, by all means, like try to hang out with them more and be around them more. That would be a good person to have. I do not want this pain anymore. Yeah. So anxiety attacks, it's something that's difficult to explain to other people. It's something that's very difficult to communicate. I feel like when I've worked with people with anxiety attacks or panic attacks, it's like trying to describe the flavor of something. Like it's you can say it's like this or it's like that, but no one will ever know. No one will ever know about your panic attacks except other people who have panic attacks. So sometimes finding a support group or online, there's so many groups of people who experience what you know. I've never had a panic attack or anxiety attack. I don't know exactly what it's like, although I've worked with a lot of people who have. But for me, what helps me out a lot is just taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. And not in an abstract level, but just that confidence that I have that yes, I might be experiencing something very difficult.
Oh, sorry, Bante. I think Flower added the.
Well, it is a person.
Yeah, he is becoming a monk. I cannot talk to them.
Oh, so then there's like
Mm.
a like it's two layers, right? There's like you have this thing, this experience of having panic attacks, and then you're also losing someone important to you, right? Someone who helps you, and yeah, I mean they're different things, but they're all really coming from the roots of greed, hatred, and delusion. It's kind of a very very theoretical kind of concept to kind of uh, understand when we're overwhelmed by these feelings and these states of like being in the panic attack. It's very uncomfortable. Your heart's racing, you're sweating, you may not be able to breathe, you feel like you're choking your throat, right? You feel like everyone's watching you, everyone knows, like the world's crushing in on you. That's what some of my people that I work with have told me, like claustrophobic, or that like they're gonna die. And to have that compounded with when you're not having a panic attack, this feeling of loss, right? Like loss. So I think when we lose someone that we love, whether they die or they're alive, we go through grief. So we have to acknowledge that grief. We can't try to push it away or or minimize it. Sometimes if we lose someone that we love, it's very natural for us to grieve and to feel validated to grieve. But when we lose someone, like in your situation, we may not feel validated, like, oh, this is not real grief, or other people won't understand it is real. But I want to tell you, it is real grief losing someone like that. If you don't have contact, even if there's a potential for you to talk to them in the future. Right now, it's like they're already gone. Like you're never going to see them again. So I just want to let you know that whatever grief you're experiencing, it's real grief. It's a real loss, like if someone would have died. And there's no right way to grieve, or there's no like limit of like 1 month or a year to grieve. Grieving is a natural process, and it might happen forever, and it might fluctuate. Some days it might be very easy to deal with the reality that that good friend of yours is, you can't talk to them, and some days it just might be difficult because it might be compounded with these panic attacks. But when it comes to grief, the best way is just to express it and share it with others. Actually, sharing with others, going back to what I was saying earlier about like the experience of having panic attack, it's so important to have support groups. I mean, that's what the Sangha is. That's what the Sangha is designed for, people seeking spiritual liberation and completely focusing on that. So the Buddha created this kind of support system called the Sangha of Bhikkhus and Bhikkhunis in order for us to help each other. I don't think I'd be able to practice the path without other monastics like Ayasoma and Bhante Sudaso and all the monks around. It would be difficult. It would be too much for me. I wouldn't be able to live this kind of life if I was the only one practicing fasting, if I was the only one begging, if I was the only one doing. I'd give up. I'd be like, why even do it? It's too hard. I'm going against society. I'm going against everything. So, but when times get tough, I look at the other venerables. I'm like, okay, I can do it too because they're doing it, and they share with me how difficult it is for them too. So I don't feel guilty about my feelings. I don't feel like something's wrong with me. They share their experiences and all their difficulties with me. So if you get in touch with other people who also experience panic attacks, you'll feel some sort of like camaraderie, right, with them. And some of them might be like basically almost done with their panic attacks, so they've reduced them so much that you can get some hope too from them. They'll be like, oh, I was there, and now like my panic attacks don't happen that often, or I haven't had one in many years. And it gets you out of this kind of narrow perspective, because anytime you're experiencing a lot of dukkha, no matter where it comes from, the world seems very small and hopeless, like you're tight. There's nothing else that can happen. Like you're just stuck in this little box. But once we start meeting people who have similar experiences, as the world opens up, and that gives you a sort of relief. Like it's not only me. I'm not the broken one. I'm not the one that's wrong here. It's just the way things are. So yes, definitely, like, try to connect, try to find other kalyanamittas. And I mean, it's not easy to make friends in this world, right? It's very difficult, especially because we're all just like so online all the time, and to meet people face to face is very difficult. But to the extent that you can find someone, and if you're feeling grief because you lost a good friend, and just that grief is a real grief, and I just want to let you know that you can completely acknowledge that grief, and don't feel like it's not a real grief because someone hasn't died or something terrible hasn't happened.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And Flower also asks, a loved one suffers from depression and they cannot let go of a loved one who passed away. How can I help them? I think somewhat you've indirectly, already answered, right? And Rick says, what are skillful ways to interact with people who have severe mental illness, causing them to obsessively try to control us? I have compassion for them, but my energy gets quickly depleted due to having life-altering illness. Well, actually, Bante, since you have
it's just like all these questions are like
psychology degree
coming towards me. So the first thing we have to realize is two things: is that for many of us, our natural inclination is to help people, to be compassionate, but we also have to know that we're not like Superman or the Buddha or like God or something like that. We have limits, right? We have we can only tolerate things to a certain extent. So we, like this person that you're talking about, and that you can kind of like feel compassion for them in their situation, and that's the appropriate response. You're doing that fine, but then we have to also know our own limits when we're feeling tired, when we're feeling overwhelmed. Some days maybe we feel sick, or we're dealing with things in our own life, and in those days we can be so compassionate. And when that happens, we shouldn't feel guilty at all. We also deserve compassion because we feel fatigued, we feel tired, we feel overwhelmed. Maybe some days we don't respond as skillfully because we're also tired, and we shouldn't feel bad or guilty about that, because we also have problems, and things going on in our own lives that make responding in a skillful way difficult. So just do things to the degree that you can, or to the extent that you can, and that's going to change every day. And it might change from 1 minute to another. 1 minute you might feel like you have infinite compassion and boundless love, and the next minute you realize, like, man, I'm getting fed up, or I'm tired, or I don't want to deal with this. And that's fine. You don't have to. As a Buddhist, we're not forced to save the world. It's not your burden to carry the suffering of everyone else. We try to help to the extent that we can in skillful ways, but we're not forced to do it. And if you don't do it, doesn't mean that you're a bad person, right? Because you might be tired yourself, and you might be on the other side now, where you need to receive that compassion instead of giving the compassion, right? So we have to remember this, that we need to be very wise about our own limits, and know our own limits, and when we're tired and when we're fatigued. And we also need to be able to set boundaries, make very clear boundaries. And it's difficult if you're living with this person, right? If you're living with a person in this situation, it's very difficult. But in those situations, it's all about communication. It's all about communicating, and also finding other people that can support you, even if it's just listening to you. Sometimes when we find ourselves, maybe you're the caretaker of this person, or it's like your brother or sister or someone very close that you can't escape, and they're always going to be around. The burden is lightened by sharing it with others. When you tell others about your situation, right? You'll be surprised, like, how good that feels, just to be able to share it instead of keeping it to yourself and like playing these mental debates where you start questioning everything that you did. Was it the right thing to do? Was it not the right thing to do? And you start beating yourself up, and you feel guilty. You'll notice that when you share with others, other people will be like, "Oh, you did a great job. Like, I would have done the same thing." So you get rid of all that doubting and nitpicking yourself about these interactions. You'll notice that you're actually very compassionate and responding very skillfully. So some of us just have very, very. So I think most of us are running on a low battery, anyways, because everything that's going on in our lives, with our jobs and society, and it seems like the world's going to end every week if you watch CNN and Fox News, right? Like, we're exhausted. We're exhausted. We're not like Amitabha with infinite energy and compassion for everyone. So just kind of, you have to think about yourself and practice self-compassion and self-care, like real self-care, and knowing your boundaries, and setting good boundaries, healthy boundaries, and knowing your limits. And And if you give one moment of compassion, that's a beautiful thing. Some people give no compassion in this life. If you're able to even give one moment of compassion, you've done a great deed. So just focus on the compassion that you do give, and in those moments where you are able to give, instead of focusing on when you can't, right? So focus on what you have been able to do instead of like what you can't do, because there's an infinite list of things that we can't do. It's, just cause you so much pain. Focusing on the things that you can do will bring you happiness, and you can rejoice in those actions.
Satum, thank you, Bante. And TJ says Epicurus, Epicuro, I don't know how you say that in English. Epicurus said, live for pleasure, wisely, honorably, and justly. What do you think? So, I actually, back in the day when I was young, I think I studied Epicuro, but I don't remember right now exactly what he said. So I'll just address not at Epicurus what he said, but rather what I'm reading that he quoted: pleasure, living for pleasure, followed by wisely, honorably, and justly. Well, it just seems like an oxymoron to me, in the sense that from the Buddhist perspective, if you actually live with the objective of just pursuing pleasure, then, well, it's unwise to begin with. And then it will create a lot of opportunities for misconduct. So most likely there will be actions that will not be very honorable nor just. And that's, to quote another one of my favorite Italian sayings, is that appetite comes with eating. So if we're pursuing pleasure for the sake of pleasure, it will just by its nature never be satisfying. So tanha actually means thirst, right? So what we normally translate as craving means thirst, and it's kind of this endless thirst, like we can't satisfy it. So another beautiful image that I actually like a lot is the hungry ghost, right? And we tend to think of the hungry ghost just being these sort of beings, whether we believe or not, in the actual existence of hungry ghosts, besides the point. But, we have this idea that it's, part of the hell realm. And, it's these ghosts, obviously, so without a body, but that they still have a kind of experience of a body. So a very large stomach and a very small mouth. So they can only introduce a few things and never actually get satisfied. And so we tend to think of it as being very separate from us. But when we actually start really looking at the nature of craving in our experience, our nature of constantly looking for things that will relieve that dukkha, then we actually, at least for me, it has been that way to actually really look at that similarity with the hungry ghost. I really like that actually image, because it's impossible to satisfy that craving when we start really observing actually the dukkha so the unsatisfactoriness of not only not getting what we want, but actually getting what we want. It's incredibly unsatisfying getting what we want. We think of it in that term, but actually it's only satisfying for a second if we're really lucky, maybe for 5 minutes if we're lucky, maybe an entire day if we're lucky. But it's very difficult to keep that any kind of sort of pleasure in getting what we want to last. So the mind is constantly looking for something else, so it never gets satisfied. And actually, the more we keep chasing objects, the more the mind is unsatisfied, and the more it keeps craving more, right? So we actually can reflect in all the natural disasters that Dante was talking about earlier. Actually, we can reflect upon the conditions that we're living. Example, here in the United States, one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest country in the world, yet actually even the food is completely insane. It's actually so crazy how the United States is the wealthiest country in the world and has one of the worst foods in the world. Why? Because it's never enough. So there's always more profit to make. There's almost always something more to chase. There's always more comfort to have. So there's always something more. There's no satisfaction. And so there's always like these kind of conditions of chasing pleasure, chasing betterment to a certain degree, actually create a lot of conditions for worsening of the conditions for ourselves and others. So we can see a little bit, also in the politics of perhaps the country, and like a lot of different experiences that if we really look at it in that. And so it's kind of somewhat easier to see it when it's outside, right? When we're looking at the news. But then when we actually think of the nature, the three characteristics or the Four Noble Truths, these kind of laws that dictate essentially everything. And then we're like, well, then how does this play out in my mind? Then we can look at it, and it doesn't matter if Epicuro said it or the Buddha said it. We can actually look at that. If I chase pleasure, is it possible to chase pleasure wisely, honorably, and justly and actually be happy? Is this really a good way to live? Or if instead, how am I relating to pleasure? This doesn't mean that, practicing the Buddhist teachings, then we're unhappy and there's no pleasure. But actually becomes significantly more pleasant, paradoxically. When we stop pursuing pleasure for the sake of pleasure, it becomes extremely pleasant, also because we realize a higher happiness. So also what Bhante was talking about earlier in terms of sukha, right? We tend to think, oh, sukha, yeah, like maybe, cake, oh, whatever, so great. Brownie is so great, or whatever it is. Maybe if we actually come from Austria, perhaps, where they have really decent, I don't like chocolate actually, but like for people who like chocolate, Austria is like, yeah, this sake cake is like really like, the best cake ever. So, an Austrian person would come to the United States and see like all these people like really obsessing about the brownie, and they're like, I really don't know anything about like the pleasures of life, right? Just like, it's just really kind of crass, gross. And so kind of the same when we actually start abandoning the sort of these coarse sensual pleasures, actually getting into higher sensual pleasures. So like the pleasures that we can have through meditation practice, the pleasures of relinquishment. And we're like, wow, this is much better than the best sake cake, right? Like we acquire a new sort of sense of sukha that is actually significantly more gratifying. And it's not that pursuit of pleasure for the sake of pleasure that actually leads to dukkha, but rather instead it leads sukha that leads towards the end of dukkha. And it's very supportive. So we have that invitation of the Buddha to actually really listen to his teachings, really practice these teachings, and really look at these teachings, experience our teachings. That's one of the qualities of the Dhamma, right? So come and see, like it invites you to come and see for yourself. So then we don't have to debate about this person or that other person, that monk or that other monk, or, Ayasoma, Bhaktisiddhanta Vihari, or the friend next door, my philosophy teacher, whoever it is. But rather, actually, we can know that. We know it for ourselves, and we can make the right decisions based on that. And Spookwater says, can you please chat about using that feeling of craving as an object of meditation and enduring it? Bhante, I think I've spoken a lot about craving.
Yeah, the way I look at craving is that it's unquenchable. There's nothing I can do that will ever satisfy it. As I was saying, before I became a monk, I used to kind of play this game, kind of morbid game, a little bit in my mind, where I would think about all the possible scenarios that could happen. Because I was still like, I wanted to be a monk, but there's always that kind of little voice like, oh, maybe you shouldn't do it. This is not the best thing. So I was like, okay, what about if I continue doing this? And I would play out all these scenarios, and then I would get to like, I'm old and I die. And then I'd run another scenario. So I was running through all these simulations of my life, going through it. And I was like, even if I become like the president, or I become like the most famous celebrity, or if I become the richest person, or if I become the most like at the end, I always like, but I would still want more. And then I said, well, if I would, like take over the world or the galaxy or the universe, then I'd be like, well, then I would want more. And then I would just want more and more and more. So that's the like the aspect of craving that I would focus on. That it will never be satisfied.
Yeah.
And when I saw that, it just the only natural response was like, then why even play that game? Like, why even give into it? It's just a waste of time. It's like, I don't know, putting stuff somewhere and then just have it disappear, and you keep trying to fill it up, but it's like an endless void that it goes into, and you're not doing anything. You're just wasting time and energy doing this, and it's never going to add up. It just all disappears. It falls apart as soon as you put it in to try to fill that void. It's an endless void that you can't ever be satisfied. So that's the nature of craving that I would always focus on, and that would just lead to dispassion. That's it. It's the natural reaction, is dispassion. Like, no thanks. Like, I don't play that game anymore. So that's always been, even to this day, when things get difficult, you think like, how can things be like different, right? And then I get caught up in this kind of fantasy for 2 or 3 minutes, and I'm like, oh, like, no, like, it's dumb, because I already know how that's gonna end at the end. Like, I already know that it's not gonna end, and that's why we keep going through samsara. That's what keeps us on the hamster wheel. So I just whatever, so focus on that, on the unsatisfactoriness, that it can't ever be quenched. Like the Buddha said about it could rain gold, right? But our thirst would never be quenched. I think it was in the Dhamma or something like that. I forget where it's at, but yeah. So that's my suggestion if you want to meditate on tanha itself, that it's unquenchable.
And Sima, hello, Sima says, can you tell us about diet in Buddhism? Is vegetarianism preferred? Well, so obviously in Buddhism, there's, we can say, 2 paths, the monastic path and the lay path. And also within the monastic path, and the lay path, actually, we have a lot of different traditions. So in the monastic path, usually, if you wear robes of this color, you're an alms mendicant. So to a certain degree, you have very little control over your diet. So the practice is more of receiving what is offered. Obviously, there are certain kind of limitations on that as well. But normally, if we're going pindapata, so if we're going out to do our alms round, we rely on the generosity of the people that we encounter, and they will put in the bowl what they feel like offering. And then it's up to the individual monastic, to decide whether or not to eat whatever is in their bowl. In the Mahayana tradition, usually the monastics grow their own food, have a little bit more agency cook their own food to a degree or the other. So they have a little bit more agency. And so historically, the monastics, when they kind of went from a sort of more alms mendicant practice to a more kind of hands-on food growing practice, obviously they they started controlling what they were eating. And obviously we have lots of precepts that prevent us from even owning animals, for example, let alone killing them. So obviously that created the conditions for vegetarianism to be the status quo for Mahayana monastics. Now, in the Theravada tradition, usually that's not a mandate. This being said, different monasteries, if the monastics are, a little bit more sedentary, and so people are coming to the monastery specifically to offer food, then some monasteries are vegetarian. Empty Cloud Monastery is a vegetarian monastery. So not necessarily the monastics living at Empty Cloud are vegetarian, but the monastery is vegetarian. And that was a decision that was made just because, once again, here, usually the people that are coming to the monastery to give food. For the lay people, it's important to clarify, we see in the suttas that the actual eating of food is not, so the eating of meat is not, doesn't have any sort of blame in the early texts. But rather, it's more, what is more problematic is how do we procure, how does that meat essentially end up in our plate? So how many degrees of separation do we have from the killing? And so the idea, for example, for the monastics is that if we're going out on alms round and then someone puts meat in our bowl and it appears in our bowl, it's completely blameless, right? Unless the person has actually killed the animal for us. So if we suspect or see that someone has killed the animal for us, we cannot take it. But if it just appears in our bowl and we eat it out of sustenance, it's blameless, because we're so far removed from the act, right? But for householders, for lay people, you have a bit of a more complicated lifestyle. So more complications, because actually you usually work and then you buy food, right? Or maybe you also have animals. So there's those degrees. I would say there's a karma, intentional karma. So it's intentional action that has a product. So if one goes fishing, that's clearly a really intense karma, because you're actually killing a creature and then eating it. And that has really severe karma. Buying it, I would say, has a bit of a lower karma, but it's still an act of karma. And it's also, I would differentiate also if one buys like meat at the supermarket or buys meat at farmer's market. So understanding how the animal has lived before going to the slaughterhouse. So what are we doing? There's lots of different actions that we can do, a lot of different thoughts that we can put into it. This being said, I would suggest that ideally we would always go back to right intention, so the intention of harmlessness, and so try to reduce as much as possible our consumption. So if we're eating meat every day, well, maybe multiple times a day, maybe we can reduce it to once a day. If we're eating it once a day, then we can actually reduce it perhaps to 6 times a week, and then 5 times a week, 4 times a week, kind of always reducing a little bit, renouncing, letting go. And then if we are a vegetarian, then maybe we can actually reduce it even more, maybe, right? And try to have that aspiration at least, and it's very beautiful. Also, going to India, it's really inspiring to see actually how so many people are vegetarian by default, and that doesn't mean eating kind of whatever processed food that is marketed in one way or the other. There's actually a status quo, like a delicious cuisine that is by default vegetarian, and one can see actually, I remember the first time I had gone there, I was like, oh wow, like it didn't even occur to me, but for a month I've been vegetarian without even thinking about it. It's completely like feasible. So these are some reflections. I don't know, Dante, if you have any thoughts.
No, you said it. You said it all, I think.
And we have a question for you, Dante. I know you're leaving Epcot in October. Will you be back in the future?
So I definitely will be back. When? I don't know. I think I won't be back here for some time, but I'm definitely going to meet up with the monastics probably in Europe before I even come back here. So I'll probably first, you'll see me with them on traveling around Europe. And then after that, sometime I'll come here.
Okay. And Denise, good to see you, says, we like our brownies just fine. The soccer not so much. Rick says, I have 28 years of recovery in AA and 26 years in AI, ANON.
Yeah.
I don't know.
For like the family members of that support.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've continued to show up in love and service to others in these groups. However, I moved to an area where most people reject spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. I have found refuge in online Buddhist groups. Should I spend my time with good spiritual friends online, or should I keep showing up in unhealthy groups of recovery? Well, I would say that you kind of ask yourself the question and gave you the answer as well, good spiritual friends or unhealthy groups. I would say whether it's online or in person, good spiritual friends is yay, thumbs up. Unhealthy groups, no bueno. And Facebook user, we can't see your name, says, we all look for personal pleasure, for happiness. However, the best one is without any self, and above all, without causes. Anything born without self and causes does not change nor finishes. The only real happiness of this kind is mudita. What's your view, Bantes? Okay.
So there's so many, I mean, happiness can also be very wide. Sukha can be very wide, kind of like we're talking about dukkha. So there's different degrees, right? We can talk about like a blameless, pleasant feeling that arises from when you're sitting in meditation, that your back is straight, you're comfortable, and right, you're just relaxed. And like there's a sense of physical pleasure that comes there from just being comfortable, from not moving around, from stillness. So that's a blameless pleasure. That's a blameless happiness, right? That you get. There's also like the mental calmness, and that's also that joy that comes. That's also another kind of happiness or pleasure that comes. And then there's like higher pleasures, like if you go to the jhanas, there's those pleasures, right? And then there's the supreme happiness of nibbana, freedom from all desires, from all craving. So there's definitely like these blameless qualities. Also, since you brought up mudita, all the Brahma Viharas, at least how I practice them, starting practicing metta, I feel pleasure practicing metta. Like it feels good. It makes me happy to practice metta. Karuna also, unlike how some people practice karuna, they think it's like a morbid practice or like you have to feel horrible. Actually, no, karuna is an optimistic practice because you're seeing that beings can be free from suffering. As the Buddha showed us in the Four Noble Truths, right? There is suffering, there's the cost, there's the remedy, the path to be free from suffering, and there is freedom from suffering. That's compassion, right? Like, wow, that's such good news that we can't be free from suffering. So even when I practice compassion, I don't focus on like everything's hopeless, everything's miserable. I'm like, no. Like beings can be free from suffering because the Buddha brought the Dharma, and things are impermanent. So even if they're feeling physical pain, they will be free from that suffering. So even for me in compassion, in karuna, there's happiness. Mudita, of course, mudita literally means to be happy, joy. It means joyfulness, right? So you see it there. And even upekkha, because it's just such a beautiful, serene state, right? So a state where there is no hindrance in the mind. There's nothing bothering the mind. It's also pleasant. It's pleasurable not to have sensual desires, not to have anger, not to have sloth and torpor, not to have anxiety and worry, not to have doubt. That feels good, right? So of course, in the level of upekkha, you'll also feel a lot of pleasure. So there's these blameful or worldly pleasures, and there's the unworldly or blameless pleasures, as the Bodhisattva for himself, Prince Siddhartha, found out when he practiced, after he finished practicing the asceticisms, right? He remembered when he was sitting under the rose apple tree as a kid, and he practiced jhana, and he's like, why was I scared of pleasure?
Mm-hmm.
Why was I scared of it? It's blameless. It has nothing to do with the senses. Could this be the way to, the deathless? And then he went into pleasure. He went into happiness, right? So that we have to make the distinguish between worldly, sensual pleasure and unworldly, blameless pleasure.
Sadhu. Okay, and Hyang says, without proper guidance, can a person go mad if they do the wrong way, I guess you're saying, insight meditation? I mean, I would say it's good to have a guidance. Yes, absolutely. Can a person go mad? I wouldn't say that the person would go mad by doing wrong insight meditation. They would probably go mad doing
frustration.
Some kind of
going the wrong way.
Yeah. Usually, from my experience, when people have problems during retreats of psychosis and stuff, usually they're actually not following the instructions of the teacher, but rather they are doing something that perhaps they read in a book, and usually it's something that has to do with visualizations, or has to do with perhaps like Kundalini technique, breathing techniques, and all sorts of ways, perhaps Hindu practices. And sometimes people confuse Hinduism with Buddhism and tend to think that one is a shortcut to, kind of reach certain things that they find perhaps also in wording similar to Buddhism and so forth. And so they're not doing one or the other, and they're actually especially doing, perhaps taking different things that from spiritual traditions that really are based on having a strong teacher that guides you within all those different passages, and you have to have a really vigorous training in order to access that type of practice. So on the flip side, if you actually are just trying to do sort of mindfulness of breathing, even if you kind of get the steps wrong and you're doing it in your room, I doubt you will go bad. The worst case scenario is you're just going to be wasting some time. But even there, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a waste of time, because at least you're learning how to sit for some kind of time without like moving around or twitching. So yeah, those are kind of like the thoughts that are appearing in my mind. Do you have anything else that?
I mean, if you've already been diagnosed with a mental disorder that gives you psychotic symptoms, something you definitely want to be aware of, be mindful of, right? When you go into the meditation, you could induce it. If you're on drugs, obviously, that's another thing that can happen. So just be very honest with yourself. If you already have a history of experiencing like hallucinations, delusions, other psychotic symptoms, talk to your therapist or your doctor before you practice meditation. Have someone that you can share your experiences with. Hopefully someone who has some experience, practicing. Because in my experience, when people have reported things like this, once I start asking them, their mental health history comes out, and that's usually been the case. Or drugs. They might not be on the drugs right now, but they've have drug use in the past. So just be very honest with yourself, and it's always better to be safe. And if you feel yourself kind of going into a state like that, don't push yourself, don't force yourself. Kind of just step away, check in with yourself, call a friend, call someone, do whatever you need to do to kind of ground yourself and come back from that state, that altered state that you were in.
Thanks. Thank you. Hello, Tineri. Good to see you online. So Tineri has 2 questions, it seems. So one for me. Aya, what insights have you gained from taking care of your parents? Wow. Yeah, actually, anicca dukkha anatta. And I've learned a lot about actually the 4 noble truths, all 4 of them. Yeah. But in particular, actually, I would say the profundity of dukkha. So really also the reflections that the Buddha had when he talks about himself in the suttas, when he was an unenlightened bodhisattva, and he was having a great time in his palace. I was thinking about this a lot, and like he's having a great time. And then he goes out and, he's reflecting upon old age, sickness, and death. And really understanding how we're all subject to old age, sickness, and death. And sometimes, if we, in our lives, we all have those encounters with people who are older than us, who are sicker than us, or perhaps passing away. And sometimes there can be this also thought of a little bit of disgust, kind of like, oh, that's gross. And that sense of like, this is not really the state that I'm currently in. And because it's so far removed, we perceive it as so far removed from our current experience, we just feel like it's not something that we're subject to. But when, it starts happening to people who are closer to us and also to ourselves, then we actually get a bit of a sense. And so like the reflections, I guess, that the Buddha really invites us to, that he did with himself and that he shares with us, are so profound, of going like, well, it would be just really inappropriate for me to have that thought appearing in the mind, right? When me too, I have the same exact condition. I am not exempt from this. And so having that experience of unsettlement actually with my parents all of a sudden being old, we are we have that really static idea of our parents being kind of this reliable sort of source, at least, in Italian culture, the parents are really kind of they're always your parents. Doesn't matter how old you are. So like every kind of my entire life since I can recall, like my parents would always come and pick me up at the airport. And then all of a sudden, right after COVID, like my parents, when I went to visit them, I was at the airport waiting for them. And then I called home, like I called my dad and he had forgotten. And I was like shocked. It was like the first earthquake. So that anicca and that dukkha. And then the anatta, like the impersonality of it. But seeing how instead, I was taking this, even though I'm a practitioner, even though I'm a monastic, I was like, wow, I was actually taking this as permanent. And as somewhat like, satisfying, like it's actually really nice that my parents always come and pick me up. And then when it stopped being the case, I was taking it so personally. Like, I was like, why is this happening? Like, this shouldn't be happening. It's kind of like just if you made like a silly thing, for people who perhaps don't have their parents picking them up, or if they have their parents, it's kind of like a trivial example. It was actually the biggest earthquake that I had. Worse things happened afterwards, but that was like really had a huge impact on my mind. And then seeing, because I live so far away, my parents now are in their 80s, seeing their old age, the decrepitude of the body happening so quickly, because it happens so rapidly, but because I'm not there every day to see the sort of slow decline, for me, it happens kind of day and night. It's a shock. And it's really a lot of dukkha. It's really difficult to bear. And also seeing how the mind doesn't want to accept that, it gets getting in touch with something that doesn't like, and it's really has to see the decrepitude. And also my body is getting older as well. It's not different, it's not exempt. So looking at that in myself as well, just like this wake-up call. We tend to really jump to the third noble truth and the fourth noble truth, and we're kind of like, I understand suffering, otherwise I wouldn't be even a monastic or a practitioner. I wouldn't be here listening to a Dhamma talk online, right? If I'm a lay person, like, we kind of go like, I understand the suffering, duh. Let me get out of here. But actually, the first noble truth is a noble truth. The second noble truth is a noble truth. No different than the third noble truth and the fourth noble truth. It's not like there's only one noble truth, the way out of suffering, or the two noble truths, the way out of suffering and the end of suffering. But the truth of dukkha is noble. Like, we need to understand it. And there's so many layers. So I guess that profundity of the first noble truth, it's astounding to me, actually. I thought I really understood suffering until until lately. So getting really deep into it and allowing myself to grieve, to really be distressed also, without actually wanting it to be, because we have so many expectations from ourselves as well. We're like, like this Buddhist practitioner, I've been practicing, not since the day before yesterday, but like now it's been a while, and also monastic, and like each one of us can have so many ideas, so many attas that then we start building up, and sometimes they can actually come in our way, because then we think we've graduated already, but actually we haven't. If we really fully understood the Four Noble Truths, we would be awakened. So we really need to spend that time. So this was long story, extra long, of the insights. And now there's a question for Bante. How were you exposed to Buddhism?
I mean, I grew up around Buddhism my whole life. I was fortunate enough to be born like in a place where the Dhamma was. I grew up in this like small neighborhood in Koreatown in LA, and I didn't know, but just down the street when I was a child, 2 blocks away, there was the International Buddhist Meditation Center where the Dalai Lama went. Thich Nhat Hanh, Bhikkhu Bodhi was living there for some time. Like all the heavy hitters, Buddhist celebrities,
Wow.
they were all there during the time that I was growing up, but I didn't know. So it was like down the street. And then also Koreatown, although most Koreans in LA are Christian Protestant, there's still a Buddhist kind of population there of Koreans and also Chinese Buddhists. So it was always kind of there around me. And then me going to school, there was obviously a lot of Asian Americans in my schools, and then on TV and picking it up. So it was always there around me. But it wasn't until I was in high school where I went through all the Greeks philosophers, trying to find answers to my dukkha. And I came across Buddhism, and then I got a book by the Dalai Lama, The Joy of Living and Dying in Peace. And that book was a book on the Eightfold Path, and the Dalai Lama talking about his life too in that book. And I said, this is it. Like, this is the truth, but I was still very immature at that time, so I knew the truth, but I just had too many obstacles. I couldn't get it, like I saw it all the way over there, but it's like there's too many things in the way. I can't get there yet. But luckily enough, at that time, I had a lot of Hollywood High School. There's a lot of Thai, so I had a lot of Thai friends who were Buddhist, and they also taught me. And then my high school sweetheart, she was Buddhist too, Vietnamese Buddhist. So it was just always around me. And then my first attempt to really like go deeper into Dhamma is when I was 20 years old, like a month or two before I was going to leave to boot camp in the Air Force. I went to a Thai temple. I went twice, but we couldn't communicate. And then it wasn't until 2010 when I started watching Ajahn Brahm on YouTube with those pixelated videos, like old school Ajahn Brahm talks. And I just got like obsessed with him. And I was watching him every day, twice a day, watching Ajahn Brahm and the other monastics there. And then it was around like 2013 when I went to a Sri Lankan temple. And then once I showed up there, then that was it. Like I started showing up every Friday for meditation, and even going to all these Sinhalese programs where I couldn't understand anything, but I just wanted to be in the temple and I wanted to be around the monks. So that was really like how I came into Buddhism. And then after that, it's just like, the rest is history.
Sadhu. Excellent. We're very happy you found Buddhism, Bhante. And I have another question for you from Hai Yang. How can meditation help those suffering from depression, dementia, and anxiety?
So, meditation is a very general word. It's like saying, how can sports help with depression, dementia, and anxiety? Well, it depends what type of sport you practice, right? You can, if you're practicing like swimming, it'll have very different effects than like running or than curling, that winter sport where they just like shave the ice and they push that thing. So like meditation's too general to talk about any specific benefits. But usually when people talk about meditation in this context, they're talking about mindfulness, right? Or loving kindness, like compassion meditations, usually when we think about Buddhism. And even when we think about mindfulness, there's two types of meditations. There's the more focused, concentrative practice, and the more kind of open awareness or insight kind of practice of meditation. And all of these have different types of effects, but some general effects that you can get with any type of meditation or any type of physical activity or good, healthy eating and having a support system. It's just like stress relief, right? And like feeling comfortable. That's some very obvious benefits that you can get even from just like going to the spa or like, listening to music. So just, there's those common things that are shared with anything that you do that doesn't bring you stress and you find pleasant. So there's those common things. But some things that we just talk about, like very strict kind of mindful practices of not a concentrative type, but more open awareness or insight ones, is that they have a lot to do with like memory. So the supporting like memory functions is also an important thing. With depression, it's not so clear exactly what's going on, but what it does help with is the rumination, negative rumination, which is a symptom that is shared both by depression and anxiety. They both are very self-centered, and rumination, a lot of thoughts. And if you practice mindfulness meditation, what it does is it kind of shuts down or reduces the default mode network, which is what activates the negative rumination. So you'll see this kind of reduction of mental chatter, which will be a great relief if you're feeling depression and anxiety. But there's so many benefits you can get from mindfulness meditation or compassion meditation. it has mindfulness aspects in it, and then it has also the bonus of like getting rid of like negative talk. So if you notice that you have a lot of negative rumination, or you ruminate anyways in a negative way, not towards yourself or towards others, I would kind of suggest that you practice more compassion-focused meditative practices like the Brahma Viharas or Tonglen, or these kind of more metta-based practices. From what my research, you get like a double benefit. You get the benefit of mindfulness because you're focusing on one thing, and you also get the benefit of developing compassion for yourself, for others, and receiving compassion from others, which is sometimes very difficult for us. So yeah, just that's very general benefits about practicing Buddhist meditation.
Excellent, thank you. And Julie says, I have been practicing Satipatthana Vipassana for 2.5 years. For long term, what are your thoughts about me practicing Anapanasati? Should I stick to my original practice, or it is wholesome to change? Well, actually, Anapanasati is part of the Satipatthana, so it's part of mindfulness of the body. So you should already be practicing it. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually important. I mean, I'm not a big fan of quote unquote methods. So I don't know if by Satipatthana Vipassana you mean maybe there's like a sort of trademarked
yeah,
because a lot of people have lots of different ways of talking about different meditations, because Vipassana just is a word that means insight fundamentally. So yeah, I'm not a big fan personally of methods. So following that method or that method or that method, but rather my approach personally is for bhavana, so mental cultivation. So we see in the early teachings of the Buddha how really the Buddha gives us these also brush strokes actually on how to essentially look at the mind, how to cultivate the mind. And so it's important. I find it very important to learn all of these, what we can call like meditation techniques that are so vast, so big, so from the Brahma Viharas all the way to mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the mind, the Satipatthanas, of course. But like there's also Buddha Nusati, like recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, Sila Nusati, recollecting the qualities of our Sila. So all the precepts that we hold, Chaga Nusati, all the good things that we do, like Deva Nusati, recollecting the Devas, also the immaterial sort of beings that are so great because they've done so many good deeds that they have an even better sort of state of existence than we do, and recollecting how actually by the power of our practice we're actually no different than the Devas, right? It's like oh, this feels good, so there's so many ways to cultivate the mind and direct it towards the wholesome, which is a little bit different than approaching what we call meditation practice and doing that technique. There's also a lot of benefit in that, don't get me wrong. Of course, it's good to also, there's time and place for that as well. But if one has been practicing for a while, I think it's important to always go back to the original teachings of the Buddha and see also how he teaches the monastics. Also remembering to contemplate death, right? To contemplate also the body, contemplate the non-beautiful, like really train the mind to really also use to introduce the right points of reflections at the right time, right? Because otherwise our practice can become a little bit too static, to just limit it to some particular time and place. So these are the things that come to mind. No, Bante, if you want to share something, we have 5 minutes actually. Maybe we should.
Next one.
Yeah. Sima says, as monastics, how much time do you spend with your loved ones and family? If you can't visit, do you talk with them frequently?
I mean, when I'm at my home temple in North Hollywood, maybe like once every other week, they'll come visit me for a few minutes, and then maybe like a text here and there, like once a week. And I visit my mom maybe twice a year, Like I'll go to her house twice a year. But yeah, I mean, to me, it seems like it's enough, and I think that might be different depending on the different relationships and cultures that you come from. But for me, it seems like we spend enough time.
And this is also a related follow-up. I imagine they must miss you so much. And you, them, were they shocked when you decided to become monks? Yes and yes. Unless one is born Buddhist, everybody's always shocked.
My sister told me, you're always weird, so I knew you were going to do something like this.
Yeah, actually, also my brother's like, all right, you always have to be weird. Okay, Venerables, joy to see you, and you as well, Scott. John, you have grown up in hostile environments. Is it difficult to maintain composure in these cases? Can you tell us of some successes in maintaining composure in these?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very violent environment where sometimes even my mom as a child, I remember her rushing into the living room and throwing us to the ground because there was drive-bys. I remember knives being pulled out on me, a gun once. I remember being beat up a couple times, like my cousins getting shot and stabbed. And then even as a monk, I've been threatened many times walking down the street, sometimes by gang members, or sometimes just by people who are literally out of their mind. But I always think about what's beneficial for me. Like, I can't control what's going to happen in the physical world, but I can control my mind. And what's best for me, to be in fear, to be angry, to be scared, or to be in a place of equanimity, to be in a place of loving kindness and compassion. So I think I really try to protect my mind, especially now as a monk, because I know how important it is. And if something were to happen to me, and those were my last moments as a human being in this world, what kind of state would I want to hold in my mind? What would I want to be my last mental state? So I really try to stay true to my practice and hold skillful, wholesome mental states whenever I encounter difficult states, because the Buddha said that anger can never overcome anger. Anger can only be overcome by like loving kindness.
Sato. And TJ says, what is the difference in meditation between the Thai forest tradition and Goenka's tradition? Well, it's a bit of an open-ended question in the sense that Goenka, yeah, there is actually like a sort of specific meditation technique, and there's a tradition. When we're talking about the Thai forest tradition, I mean, there's a lot of Thai forest traditions. So I will speak about the Ajahn Chah, for example, Thai forest tradition, where it's actually a little bit the method of no method in a way. Like, it's a little bit the method of whatever works. So it's really a little bit more, I would say, in tune to what I was talking about earlier. So mental cultivation, so that there's a lot more to than just, being in a kuti and doing a particular method over and over, like, or in a specific space. So there's actually a lot of different ways. For example, at the monastery of Ajahn Chah, when he was alive, it was, and still today actually in Ajahn Chah monasteries that I'm aware of, it was forbidden to have noble silence, to be noble silence. It's very interesting. We tend to think of like, like, for example, Goenka Center, there being noble silence by default. But actually, Ajahn Chah was very, very serious about it, that it was forbidden to have noble silence. Now, people were not encouraged to talk, like, just for the sake of talking. But the reason why there was no noble silence was that there was the encouragement of learning how to speak correctly. So how to develop samavacha. So, it's very easy to a certain degree to have right speech when you're shutting up. And it's a whole other practice to actually speak properly when you have the opportunity. So yeah, you need to practice. So I would say that would be, kind of a little bit of a maybe giant difference. And I think there was actually this question here that I lost before. That was from Celestino, a Facebook user. I understand so it was follow-up for you, Bante. I
Mhm.
understand your view about the blameless happiness states and agree that with Karuna one gets a higher happiness than with Metta. However, in these two states, there's still some kind of self. Is it right that only Mudita is totally empty of any self?
No, all of them have self until you become an arahant. There'll always be self-view. So no matter what you practice, there'll always be lingering self. It may not be the gross kind of like ego self, but there's definitely going to be mana there, right? Like superiority, inferiority, or equal. So there's always a sense of self there. But it's just the good thing about the Brahma Viharas is that the self becomes smaller because it gets encompassed within all this kind of like all these other beings. So it's a kind of a reduction of the self, but it's not an elimination of the self. So there's always going to be a self there until you become an arahant, no matter what you're practicing.
Okay, that was perfect and
On time.
on time. At 9 p.m. for this monk chat. Thank you so much for joining in and asking all these good questions. And well, if you're around the monastery, we might see you this weekend. Otherwise, we'll see you next Wednesday.
Yes,
Again,
like,
same time.
share, subscribe, comment, and all those good things. Because the venerables, they're very humble. They like, oh, it's okay. But I'm not from this temple, so I can promote this temple. I feel blameless. So please share this on your Facebook accounts, share this on your Instagram, tag us, hashtag Buddhist Insights, hashtag Empty Cloud. Do everything that you can because you're sharing the Dhamma, right, for the benefit of all beings. So do whatever you can, whatever's within your means. We share some cat videos. We share all these silly things. Why can't you share the Dhamma? Why can't you share the monastics, right? We do all this kind of stuff on social media. We share all this kind of weird news, conspiracy theories and hate news. Please share something for the benefit of all beings. Let's switch the algorithm from negativity to positivity. So please do whatever you can with this video.
Thank you, Bante. And actually, if you also know people who want to listen to the Dharma in Spanish, since we're in the promotion, then you should go to El Monje en la Modernidad.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
So you can find that actually in our the channels that Buddhist Insights follows. Or you can send us an email. We'll send you the link. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. And we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be all well and happy, and may all good things come to you. See you soon.